stage with my good friend Christa. So Christa and I have known each other for 20 years. So we met in business school, and I've always
really kindergarten. It's all good.
I've always known Christa to be a friend, like a good buddy. And it's just so interesting to have charted her path over the last 20 years. And she is such a badass. So today she's leading the OpenTable team as the CEO of OpenTable. And woo! So yeah, so she's definitely the epitome of leaning in. And so before we start, I want to show a clip of you being interviewed by Katie Couric, of all people, in response to a question of what it's like to work in two male-dominated cultures. So first, your early career in Wall Street, and then now in Silicon Valley. So if we can roll the clip.
When I started on Wall Street, just to give you some perspective, they had just outlawed strippers on the trading floor a couple years back. And I'm not as strong as Mindy because I did forsake my values, actually. I showed up and I looked around and I was like, I guess this is the game on the field. I gotta go play this game. And if that meant showing up and swearing like a sailor or laughing at jokes that were definitely inappropriate, I did it. And one of the things that I realized now looking back is I showed up as a man to be accepted by men. And as I think about transforming the culture at OpenTable, sometimes your best lessons are the ones that you see something horrible going on. It was literally like, I can never do that. So yes, then I go from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. And what's interesting about Silicon Valley is that there's this, we're so progressive. We're so, we're changing the world. And yet, the sexism is almost more insidious because it's less overt. And so the covert sexism, you show up to work sometimes and you're like, am I crazy? Like, is this happening right now? And so you look at all these things that go on around you, and then you get into a leadership role and you say, it's not just that I can change the rules, I must.
So I wanted to start out by showing that clip because to me that was just sort of the epitome of Christa. So fiery, badass, but also wanting to change the rules of the game. So I want to first start out, Christa, by asking, where did this all come from? Is this were you born with this? Did you develop this?
You do kind of have to look back at your family situation, and there's a lot of clues there. So I was the sixth of 7 kids. And just to even be seen in my family, you had to do something pretty extraordinary. Everything had already been done. Everybody had already, good and bad, on the good and bad end of the spectrum. And so, if your ultimate need in life is to find love, my only chance of doing that was to perform and to be spectacular, be different. That then led to, athletics became a really important part of my life. I recently ran into Billie Jean King, and I almost was like, Billie Jean! I go, I am a daughter of Title IX. I am a daughter of everything that you fought for, because sports for me was everything. It taught me to fail. It taught me to be on a team. It taught me to lead. It taught me to pick myself back up. You learn how to lose. And it was just recently that I saw a stat that 65% of the Fortune most powerful women had competed in either high school or college sports. And for me, that was really where I learned. And frankly, I also learned to play with men. One of the things that I did when I was on Wall Street is I played on the basketball team at Merrill Lynch with the dudes. Talk about becoming a man. And so I just was like, yeah, I can play on the same field as they can and be competitive and ultimately win. And I think that bred a lot of confidence in a workplace setting.
Awesome. So I want to track a little bit more about your arc, right? So you started your career in Wall Street, then you ended up in Silicon Valley, but share a little bit about your career choices. To me, you epitomized the breakthrough theme.
Yeah.
And so what were the career choices that you made? What risks did you take along the way? What mistakes did you make along the way?
Yeah, all of the above. It's funny. I mean, and I do believe risks are vital. By definition, there is no reward without risk, and so you have to be willing. It's interesting. So Ha and I'm going to reveal our age, I guess. We graduated from business school in 2000, and it was .com 1.0. It was the first time ever the Bay Area was the #1 destination for HBS grads. And I didn't know, I had all these friends going into startups, and I didn't know what I really wanted to do, and I certainly didn't think I was qualified to go build my own company. So I started out basically being in the professional services end of Silicon Valley. So I went to an investment bank here in the Valley that was designed to take growth companies public. And that was an incredible experience because even at the age of 26, it was, the CEO's job or this, billionaire's job to convince me that their stock was worth buying. So despite the fact that here I was, working on Wall Street, I was an internet analyst, so I covered companies like Google during their IPO, but it was their job to tell me that yes, this is a company that investors should be worth. And so it was an interesting part of the power dynamic where I really learned that the importance of a powerful question, the importance of being able to distill down a story into a digestible bite-sized chunk that somebody could understand and say, okay, yeah, is this stock a buy or a sell? But after a while, I got really tired of, and I use a lot of sports references, I guess it goes back to the mail, but of armchair quarterbacking. I felt like here I was in Silicon Valley, and everybody was building something, creating something, growing something, getting invested in something, and I was on the sidelines. And so in 2009, I decided that I'd had my first kid, and my job was punishing. I was going to go out and go to a startup. And that year, and it was a year of getting told no. I had been told by a recruiter, and the most obvious choice from going from Wall Street to a startup was go in the financial path, go be a CFO. And there was other people who had done that. One of my mentors, a woman named Sue Decker, had been president at Yahoo, but she'd started out as CFO. And so that seemed to be the normal path. But I was told by a recruiter during that process, well, I've never put a CFO in a position who hasn't already been a CFO. and I was like, well, I guess that's not going to work for me. So I basically busted my butt around a network and eventually got a recommendation from Mark Andreessen to go to this company called Playdom. But that year, I started that job in December, and I was going to get paid a 7-figure bonus 8 weeks later, early February, and I left it all on the table. And I know that is crazy. And people to this day tell me that is crazy. But I knew in my heart that continuing to stay on, in this investment banking career was not the right path for me. I was no longer happy. I was, to opine on the latest eBay quarter, I wanted to put a bullet in my head. And I just thought, I can't do this anymore.
I started my early career at eBay,
I know
so
you
be
did. I know.
careful.
And it was nothing wrong with eBay so much as it was me. I had outgrown the role. I was so over it. And in sort of these moments in life where you check in with yourself and you go, was today a good day? Did today bring joy in my life? And it didn't. It's time to move. I felt stuck. And to me, the notion of leaving all that money on the table felt like the right decision. Now, the good news is the postscript we got acquired by Disney less than 12 months later, so it all worked out.
Awesome. Let's talk about your current role, which is CEO. So how did you get the top job? What choices did you make to get?
Well, that's another example of risk-taking. So I did not enter OpenTable as the CEO, but during the interviewing process, it was very clear that this CEO job was going to open up. And so I took a calculated bet. I thought, okay, if this role is going to eventually open up, and I thought it was going to open up in a year or two, if I'm in the company, if I can demonstrate my ability to add value, then there's a high probability outcome that I'll get the job. So it was a huge bet on, my ability to convince the organization that I was worthy of the job. The interesting thing that happened was instead of a year or two, 3 months later, I was interim CEO. So there was a bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes that I wasn't aware of. But it is hard. I mean, I think the reality is if you are not a founder in founder-obsessed Silicon Valley, CEO jobs are very few and far between. And they're challenging to get. And they often come with OpenTable was a company that, while the consumer side has this incredible 80+ NPS score, the restaurant side needed work and a lot of it. And so there was an element of a turnaround embedded in that opportunity.
So I want to touch upon the point that you made of Silicon Valley being founder obsessed. And you're not a founder, so what are the challenges that you face going in, not being the founder, and how do you create a culture that is innovative? Because OpenTable has been around for quite,
20 years.
So how do you sort of create that culture of innovation? How do you, paint that vision for where you want to take the company forward?
Yeah, and so I think part of that is is the self-awareness of what is my best skill and contribution to an organization. And I like to say there's people who are really good at connecting the dots, and then there's people who are good at multiplying the dots. I'm the latter. I know that about myself. I am not there for the instantiation of the original product market fit. I'm there when the product starts to flatten out, or they need to figure out adjacencies and growth opportunities, and where are we going to take this, and how do you scale it from this idea to where it could eventually go to. And I think there are different kinds of people out there, and I think it's figuring out which one of those are you. What part of that process do you like and enjoy? And the world needs both. Let's be super clear. The second part of that question is really about culture. And culture is everything. I always joke that it is not free lunch and foosball tables culture. Culture is how people make decisions when you're not in the room. Because then the culture can be a force multiplier on everything that you hope and believe for the company. The thing that you have to recognize, though, is that as the leader, I am not the culture. I am the steward for the culture. And the culture is an organism, and it is a living, breathing thing that can either take your company where you need it to go or derail it. And when I first got to OpenTable, it was a bit of a fear-based culture. And if anyone's a student of radical candor in here, anyone? We were in the ruinous empathy end of the spectrum. Everybody was super nice, but we were not kind. We were not telling each other, like, this is what you need to do to get ahead. And the fear-based was interesting because it had been around for a long time, and it really created the environment and the market that it was serving. And so there was this movement of like, just don't screw it up. Well, again, back to my earlier statement of without risk, there is no reward. If you continue to do that, your company will eventually die. And so what I had to figure out was how do I, revitalize this notion of risk-taking. And what you realize as a leader that there's always bright lights. There's always shining examples in the organization, even if there's a few of them. And what you realize that if I shine a spotlight on these good things versus these other areas. So what I did was I shined spotlights on people who failed. And I was like, look how awesome that was. They tried this and it didn't work, but here's what we're going to try now. And it was this whole message to the organization like, oh, I guess. Because again, a culture is essentially fear-based. It's looking around and saying, how do I survive this place? How do I get to the point? What is rewarded and what is not rewarded? And here it was, failure was getting rewarded at a meaningful scale because people were trying and they were taking risks. And so it was really the risk end of the spectrum that I chose to reward, and then that reshaped what it meant to be successful inside the company. And so if you sat around, naysaying or saying, oh, we tried that, but you were not getting rewarded, and that became evident throughout the company and the culture.
Very cool. I wanted to touch on a couple things that you said. So the first one is just sort of know who you are and own it. And my friend Gib has this framework that I love, which is, are you a starter are you a builder, or are you a scaler? And for me in my career, I was always clearly in that build phase, and clearly you're very good at sort of scaling companies. And so I mean, as a takeaway, I'd love for each of you to kind of figure out who you are and own that part of you. The other thing that you talked about is radical candor. So if we have time at the end, I do want to touch a little bit more on radical candor. You talked about failure and sort of rewarding failure, but I want to know, when are the moments you failed, Christa? So tell me, and be honest, don't give me some bullshit answer. So.
No, I went to a company that was too early for me. It was pre-revenue. And it was not a good culture fit for me. I think, entered for the exit. I thought, oh, it could be this big thing. And there were signposts along the way, so I sort of set myself up into a situation that was not a good fit. And and I knew it pretty early on, and instead of listening to that inner voice and just moving on, I was so afraid of the outward kind of perception of, oh my God, like she failed, like she didn't make it work. Like, because my whole life up to that point, I've been able to maneuver. Like, I was like, okay, if this boss needs me to be this, and that's what I'll be. Or if I could always juke and jive and get myself to a point where I could find the success path. And here was a place where I was like, I had to figure out when to call it. And that was so hard for me, because my whole life I'd always managed to figure it out, and this time I just could not stick the landing. And I think that feeling of being stuck, or feeling like, and what I had to eventually tell myself was, it's always better on the other side. And the scary part of it is that you don't know what's on the other side. And so you sit there and go, oh, do I leave this thing? And so it just, admitting the failure was almost it took me too long to admit that I couldn't fix it. I couldn't figure it out. There was nothing that I could possibly do, but yet I stayed way longer than I should have, thinking that if I just did this one more thing, and it was this almost an admission to myself that no, you're not going to be able to do this. And then what was true on the other side of it was OpenTable. I never would have been able. Probably wouldn't have even gone on the job interview had I not been in this situation. And so this constant lesson in my life of the minute you feel stuck, just go through. Go through the other side. It's always better, and you have to believe it, even though it's uncertain and scary.
I was talking to a business school classmate of mine who, and I won't name her name, but she, several years back, had always had this amazing level of success. And in a job, she got fired, and it shook her core. She didn't think that she'd be able to recover from it, because you had success, I failed. How do I pull myself up? How do I gain my confidence again? So do you have any stories or lessons for us around pulling yourself up when life punches you in the gut?
I'll tell you, it was funny, because I had lost a lot of confidence in that job. And I lost, a sense of almost who I was. And I do remember, some of it's just one foot in front of the other, literally just get up and go talk to someone. And what was so fascinating, and I mentioned I'm one of 7 kids, so I have 4 sisters, and so I literally have a sisterhood in addition to my my other sisters out there. But truly, I remember going and speaking. It was a recruiting partner at a venture capital firm. And I said, hey, we haven't caught up in a while, can I catch up? And I went down and met with him, and I was so worried that I was going to get judged because of this failure, that I didn't make this work. And he couldn't care less. And I was and I had a friend who had she's a Southern mom, and she was always like, who's looking at you? Meaning you're so hyper-focused on what you think the world is perceiving of you. And so then you put yourself down here, and you're like, oh my God, what's he gonna think? And here I was in this probably the most prominent venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, and he literally couldn't care less that I had basically just failed last year. All he saw was like, oh, here's somebody who's really talented that I could go put in a new job. Awesome. And I came out of there and I was like, oh, I guess people are good. Like, I guess it's okay. And so, but it was a lesson of your own internal narrative, how you can get caught in your own swirl and your own belief of, oh my God, everyone's thinking this and this. And the reality is no one's thinking any of that. Most of them aren't anyway. I mean, there's probably like 3 naysayers and forget about them. But the reality is it's your own stuff that's swirling in there. And so just get out there and have a conversation and you'll be shocked at, wow, this person really reacted positively. I guess I'm going to go on another conversation. And I think that's the thing where you just, and I'll go back to sports. It's like getting knocked down. Get back up. And then you realize, I can do this. In fact, I'm pretty good at getting knocked down is actually part of the process. So be prepared to get knocked down. No, oh, I'm knocked down. I'm on my ass here. All right, time to get up. And you start developing almost muscle memory around that feeling of getting knocked down now. And you go, all right, here we are. What am I supposed to learn from this experience? Okay, I'm learning. Now let's get back up.
Very cool. I want to just take the conversation a little bit different direction, which I think will help all of us, which is around negotiating for yourself. So, when I think about badass negotiators, I think of my friend Christa, and you've always been really good at sort of, asking for what you want and negotiating, whether it be your promotion, your comp, other things. So, not all of us are good at this. How do we get over our fears around this? Do you have any tips for us on how we can ask for what we want and better negotiate?
Well, I'll tell a story because I was not always good at it. Left business school, got a job offer, did not negotiate that job. Well, prior to that, never negotiated a job offer. I was like, thank you for having the job, oh my goodness. So never negotiated anything, ever in my life. And then this was the benefit of having a very objective measure of my output. So while I was working on Wall Street, I knew very specifically, literally down to a decimal point, how much value I had brought into the company. And I had a pretty meteoric rise. So I had moved very quickly up the ranks inside the company. And so it came time for annual bonus, and they gave me my number. And I didn't know how far off it was, but I knew it was like order of magnitude off of what I should have gotten paid. And I think because in that moment, the distance of what I knew for certain, down to the decimal point, what my value was, and what I was getting paid was here, it felt just so wrong. And I will tell you that first, it was not my proudest moment, but I kind of lost it. I literally went into my boss and I was like, what the hell? And I was like, and I even went there. I was like, is this what you do to the woman? It was like, I went all the way there. I mean, I got visited by the general counsel that afternoon. And it was, again, I would not necessarily recommend that course of action. But what it did for me, and by the way, so the postscript was, I did get paid more. So I asked. But in that moment, what it did was it erased years of muscle memory of not feeling like I could ask for myself. And then I was like, oh, this is just a conversation. This is a conversation about value. And if I don't have the conversation about my value, no one else is going to have it. And so then I just got sort of comfortable. This isn't personal. This is just business. This is just business, so let's have a conversation. And oh, by the way, yes, still, even after that moment, and as a woman, I have very much been told I'm an over-negotiator. Well, screw it. You know what? Guess what? I got more. I got more for myself. And so, but the other message though is do understand the objective measures of your value, because you can then be in position to credibly advocate for yourself. I mean, even though I probably went a little on the edge here, I had the data. I knew what I was delivering in that organization. I knew what my position was and how valuable it was, and I knew where things were. And so that's another important thing too, is can you talk to each other? Find out and make sure that you know what you should or shouldn't be getting, so that you can credibly advocate for yourself.
Amazing. looks like we are out of time, and I know that KJ and Ann is going to kill me if we go over time. Do you have any last words of wisdom from a community perspective? So we're here with, we were talking about build your network and any
Well, I mean, it
thoughts
was about a year ago at a Fortune conference that I stood up and literally called bullshit on the notion that women weren't supportive of each other. And in my experience, my best advocates, my best advice, my everything has come from, I talked about sisterhood. And I think we are special here in Silicon Valley because we all get it. And I would say just encourage yourself to find each other, amplify each other's voice, be vulnerable with each other. Make sure that you say like, yeah, I'm struggling with this. And I can't tell you how many people will come back and get your back, have your back. And then it becomes this community of people that you can reach out to at any point in time. And so just find that sisterhood for yourselves.
Thank you, Christa.